When my son Trevor and his wife Amanda cornered me at what they called a family financial meeting, demanding I hand over half of my monthly pension check, they had no idea they were about to discover what happens when you try to steal from a woman who's been preparing for this moment longer than they could imagine. Hold up! I'm curious where you're listening from, and if this story spoke to you, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, what I have planned for tomorrow is going to blow you away. It started with a text message that made my coffee go cold. Family meeting tonight at 7 p.m. in the living room. Important financial discussion. Amanda. The audacity of it struck me first. She'd been living in my house for 18 months and was now summoning me to meetings in my own living room? But I simply replied, fine, and spent the rest of the day mentally preparing for whatever scheme they'd cooked up this time. I'd bought this house in Millbrook Heights 27 years ago with nothing but grit and a teacher's salary. After my husband David died in that construction accident when Trevor was only 7, I thought the world might swallow us whole. The insurance barely covered the funeral, let alone the mountain of medical bills. But I refused to break. I worked double shifts at Riverside Elementary, tutoring kids after hours, selling baked goods at the weekend farmers market, anything to keep our heads above water and this roof over our heads. Every mortgage payment came from my own sweat. Every repair, every upgrade, every single improvement to this 3-bedroom colonial on Maple Street was funded by years of careful saving and sacrifice. When the furnace died during Trevor's sophomore year of high school, I wore 3 sweaters to bed for 2 months while I scraped together the money for a new one. When the roof started leaking, I climbed up there myself with a bucket of tar and patch kit from the hardware store. By the time Trevor graduated college, which I paid for every semester, this house was mine, free and clear. The deed had my name on it. Diane Catherine Brennan. Not his, not hers, mine. That should have been the end of it. Trevor got his marketing degree, found a decent job at a tech startup in the city, and moved into his own apartment. We talked every Sunday, had dinner once a month, and I was proud of the independent man he'd become. Then he met Amanda. Amanda Walsh came from what she liked to call old money, though from what I could tell, that money had run out somewhere around her grandfather's generation. She had expensive tastes and champagne dreams on a beer budget, but she also had Trevor completely mesmerized. Within 6 months, they were engaged. Within a year, they were married in a ceremony that cost more than my annual salary and left them drowning in credit card debt. The layoffs hit Trevor's company hard last spring. One day, he had a steady paycheck. The next, he was updating his LinkedIn profile and trying to explain to Amanda why they couldn't afford their downtown loft anymore. That's when they came to me, suitcases in hand, with promises that it would only be temporary just until Trevor found something new. A few months at most, Mom, Trevor had said, giving me that boyish smile that used to get him out of trouble when he was 8. Amanda's really excited to spend some time getting to know you better. Amanda had nodded enthusiastically, though I caught her scanning my living room with barely concealed disappointment. The furniture wasn't modern enough. The kitchen appliances were functional rather than fashionable. Nothing met the standards she'd grown accustomed to. But beggars apparently could still be choosers in Amanda's world. I said yes, of course. What mother wouldn't? Besides, I told myself it might be nice to have some life in the house again. The empty nest had been echoing for years. That was 18 months ago. 18 months of watching Amanda rearrange my furniture, replace my curtains without asking, and slowly transform my guest room into what she called our space. 18 months of Trevor leaving dishes in the sink like I was the hired help. And Amanda hosting her book club in my dining room and introducing me to her friends as Trevor's mom who's letting us crash here. They found jobs eventually. Part-time, entry-level positions that barely covered their car payments, let alone contribute to household expenses. But instead of moving out, they seemed to settle deeper into my home like roots growing through foundation cracks. Amanda started talking about when we redecorate the kitchen and if we knock out this wall. Trevor began referring to the house in conversations as our place. I watched it all happen with growing unease, but I kept quiet. They were family. They were struggling. Surely they'd remember their manners and their gratitude soon enough. Then came tonight's meeting.
Trevor sat on the edge of my old leather recliner, the one his father used to fall asleep in while watching baseball games. Amanda perched on the couch with a manila folder in her lap and that bright fake smile she wore when she was about to ask for something unreasonable. "Mom," Trevor began, his voice carrying that careful tone he'd perfected as a teenager when he wanted to borrow the car. "We've been doing some research about financial planning, and we think it's time to have a serious conversation about your future." Amanda jumped in before I could respond, her manicured hands pulling papers from the folder. "What Trevor means is that we're concerned about your long-term security. You're getting older, and we want to make sure you're protected."
I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Protected from what? "Well," Amanda continued, spreading the papers across my coffee table like she was dealing cards, "your pension is substantial, but you're not really maximizing its potential. We think it would be smart to pool our resources as a family unit." Trevor nodded eagerly. "It just makes financial sense, Mom. We contribute what we can from our jobs, you contribute your pension, and we all benefit from shared expenses and collective planning." I stared at them both. These two people sitting in my living room, in my house that I'd fought to keep for nearly 3 decades, asking me to hand over the retirement income I'd earned through 42 years of teaching third graders how to read. "You want me to give you my pension money?" I said slowly, making sure I understood correctly. "Not give," Amanda corrected quickly. "Share, like a family investment strategy. We'd handle all the budgeting and bill paying, take that stress off your shoulders completely. You'd never have to worry about finances again." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Patterson's dog barking at something in the distance. Inside, the old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked away the seconds while I processed what they were really asking for. Half my pension. The money I'd earned by spending 40 decades shaping young minds, staying late for parent conferences, spending my own money on classroom supplies when the school budget ran dry. The financial security I'd built so I could age with dignity in the home I'd fought so hard to keep. They wanted me to hand it over and trust them to manage it for me. I looked at Trevor, my son, the little boy I rocked to sleep when nightmares about his father's death made him afraid to close his eyes. Then I looked at Amanda, who was checking her phone even as she waited for my answer to her outrageous proposal. "I need to think about this," I said finally. Amanda's smile tightened. "Of course, it's a big decision. But, Mom, can I call you Mom? You really shouldn't wait too long. These kinds of financial opportunities are time-sensitive." After they went upstairs to what used to be my guest room, I sat alone in my living room for a very long time. The house felt different somehow, like the walls were holding their breath. Through the ceiling, I could hear Amanda's voice, animated and excited, though I couldn't make out the words. I knew, sitting there in the dark, with only the streetlight filtering through my curtains, that everything was about to change. They thought they were dealing with a lonely old woman who would be grateful for their attention and eager to buy their affection with her pension check. They had no idea what they'd just started, and they certainly had no idea how it was going to end. We poured our hearts into researching and telling this story. If you're hooked, show some love with a subscribe. Now, where were we? The changes started small, the kind of things you might dismiss if you weren't paying close attention. But after 42 years of managing a classroom full of 8-year-olds, I'd learned to notice when someone was up to something they shouldn't be. 3 days after our family meeting, I caught Amanda going through my mail. Not just sorting it or bringing it in from the mailbox, actually opening envelopes addressed to me and reading the contents before I even knew they'd arrived. "Oh, Diane," she said brightly when she saw me watching from the kitchen doorway. I was just trying to help organize things for you. You get so much paperwork, and I know how overwhelming it can be at your age. At my age. I was 68, not 98, and my mind was sharper than her manicured fingernails. But I just smiled and said, "How thoughtful of you, Dare. I'll take care of it from here." She handed over the stack reluctantly, but not before I noticed she'd already opened my bank statement and what looked like correspondence from the teacher's retirement system. When I mentioned it to Trevor later, he just shrugged and said Amanda was trying to be helpful, that she'd always been good with financial stuff. That's when the questions started in earnest. Casual at first, dropped into conversations over dinner or while we watched television together. "Diane, how does the pension system actually work? Like, do they adjust the payments for inflation automatically? I was reading this article about retirement planning. Do you have any other investments besides your pension? Like a 401k or anything?" My friend Jessica's mom had this issue where her pension got tied up in probate for months when she passed. Have you thought about setting up a beneficiary designation to avoid all that red tape? Each question felt innocent enough on its own, but together they painted a picture that made my stomach clench. Amanda wasn't just curious about retirement planning in general. She was mapping out my specific financial situation with the precision of a surveyor plotting boundaries. Amanda began offering to drive me to appointments, even ones I'd been handling myself for years. "You shouldn't have to worry about parking downtown," she'd say. "Plus, I can help you remember all the details to tell Trevor later." What she really meant was that she wanted to be in the room when I talked to my doctor, my banker, or anyone else who might have information about my health or finances. The most unsettling change was how they'd both grown quiet when I entered rooms. Conversations that had been animated would suddenly stop, followed by bright smiles and quick topic changes. "We were just talking about that new restaurant on Elm Street," Amanda would say, though I could have sworn I'd heard my name mentioned as I came down the stairs. "Planning a surprise for your birthday," Trevor would add, even though my birthday wasn't for 6 months. I began moving more quietly through my own house. Not sneaking exactly, but not announcing my presence either. Old habits from my teaching days. Sometimes the best way to find out what students were really up to was to observe them when they thought you weren't watching. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Late one Tuesday evening, I'd gone to the kitchen for a glass of water when I heard their voices drifting from the living room. They were speaking in the urgent whispers that people use when they're planning something they know is wrong. "The pension documentation has to be somewhere," Amanda was saying. "I've looked through her desk, but she must keep the important stuff locked up." "Maybe we should just ask her directly," Trevor replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "Ask her what? Hey, Mom, can you show us exactly how much money you get every month so we can figure out how to get our hands on it? She's not stupid, Trevor. She's also not going to live forever. We need to think long-term here." I gripped the kitchen counter so hard my knuckles went white. Not going to live forever? My own son was discussing my death like it was a business opportunity. The key is making her feel like it's her idea, like she's taking care of us by letting us manage things. Older people love feeling needed. What if she says no? There was a pause, and when Amanda spoke again, her voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Then we moved to Plan B. Dr. Morrison said cognitive decline can happen gradually. Sometimes family members are the first ones to notice when someone isn't capable of making sound financial decisions anymore. Dr. Morrison, Amanda's college roommate who'd gone into geriatric medicine. I remembered her visiting for dinner a few months ago, asking oddly specific questions about my daily routine, whether I ever forgot appointments or had trouble balancing my checkbook. At the time, I thought she was just making conversation. Now I realized it had been an evaluation.
I crept back upstairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. In the safety of my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process what I just heard. They weren't just after my pension money. They were building a case to declare me mentally incompetent if I refused to hand it over voluntarily. The next morning, I started testing them. Little things at first to see how far their surveillance had gone. I mentioned to Trevor that I was thinking about taking a weekend trip to visit my sister in Portland. Within an hour, Amanda was in the kitchen expressing concern about whether it was safe for me to drive such long distances alone. I told Amanda I had received a call from someone claiming to be from my bank, asking for account information. By evening, Trevor was explaining how elderly people were frequent targets of financial scams, and maybe I should consider letting him handle any banking calls from now on. Most telling of all, I left a fake document on my desk. Something I'd printed from a template online about setting up a trust fund. I made sure it looked official, with my name and some fictional dollar amounts, then waited to see what would happen. 2 days later, Amanda brought up the subject of trusts over dinner, mentioning how a family friend had used one to streamline estate planning and avoid tax complications. When I asked what had gotten her thinking about it, she said she'd just seen something on the news. They'd found my fake document. They'd read it, photographed it, or copied it, then they'd researched the topic enough to bring it up casually, hoping I'd volunteer more information. I was living with strangers who'd been studying me like a specimen, mapping my routines, cataloging my assets, and planning my future without my consent. The son I'd raised, the boy I sacrificed everything to give a good life, was plotting to take away my independence the same way someone might plan a hostile takeover of a business. But they'd made one crucial miscalculation. They assumed that because I was older, I was also naive. They thought a retired elementary school teacher would be easy to manipulate and control. What they didn't understand was that managing a classroom for 40 decades had taught me to stay 3 steps ahead of anyone trying to outsmart me. And unlike the 8-year-olds I used to teach, Trevor and Amanda weren't nearly as clever as they thought they were. The real question wasn't whether they were planning to betray me. I already had proof of that. The question was how far they were willing to go and how much evidence I could gather before they made their next move.
I had a feeling I wouldn't have to wait long to find out. The moment that changed everything happened on a Thursday night when I couldn't sleep. The autumn wind was rattling the windows, and I'd gotten up to check that I'd locked the front door, a habit I'd developed since overhearing their conversation about my pension documentation. As I padded down the hallway in my slippers, I heard Amanda's voice floating up from the kitchen, speaking in that urgent whisper she used when she thought I couldn't hear. "We can't wait much longer, Trevor. She's getting suspicious. Yesterday she asked me point blank why I was so interested in her retirement paperwork." I froze at the top of the stairs, my hand gripping the banister. "Maybe we're overthinking this," Trevor replied, though his voice sounded strained. "She's always been sharp. If we push too hard, if we don't push at all, we'll be stuck in this house forever," Amanda snapped. "Do you want to be 40 years old, still living with your mother? Because at the rate we're going, that's exactly where we'll be. Keep your voice down. She takes those sleeping pills. She's out cold until morning." There was a pause. Then Amanda continued with chilling matter-of-factness. "I talked to Dr. Morrison again yesterday. She says the key is documenting specific instances of confusion or poor judgment. We need examples." "What kind of examples?" "Forgotten appointments, bills left unpaid, maybe some concerning purchases or financial decisions. Morrison says if we can show a pattern of declining cognitive function, the court will appoint a conservator to protect her assets." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. A conservator. They wanted to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could control my finances legally. "And you think the court would appoint us as conservators?" Trevor asked.
Who else would they choose? We're her family. We live here. We can document our concerns about her welfare. Morrison will provide the medical testimony about age-related decline. Amanda's voice carried a satisfied tone that made my skin crawl. We have to make sure she's comfortable while also securing our future. What about the house? That's the beauty of it. As conservators, we'd have the authority to make decisions about her living situation. If this place becomes too much for her to maintain, we could sell it and move her somewhere more appropriate for her needs. Somewhere more appropriate. They were planning to take my house, my pension, and my freedom, then warehouse me in some facility while they spent my money and lived my life. But their plan had one fatal flaw. They'd underestimated exactly how sharp my mind really was. The next morning, I called in sick to my volunteer work at the library and spent the day making very careful, very strategic decisions. My first stop was Riverside Community Bank, where I'd done business for over 20 years. I sat across from Janet Fuller, the branch manager who'd helped me refinance the house years ago, and explained that I needed to make some changes to my accounts. I want to add additional security measures, I told her. I'm concerned about potential financial exploitation. Janet's expression grew serious. At 63, she'd seen enough elderly customers victimized by family members to know the warning signs. What kind of security measures did you have in mind, Mrs. Bennon? I want to require written authorization from me personally for any changes to my accounts. No phone calls, no online changes, nothing unless I'm physically present with proper identification. That's certainly possible. Any particular reason for the increased security? I hesitated, then decided honesty was the best policy. I have family members living with me who've been asking very detailed questions about my finances. I want to make sure no one can access my accounts or information without my explicit consent. Janet nodded knowingly and spent the next hour setting up what she called enhanced security protocols on all my accounts. She also provided me with documentation explaining exactly what those protocols entailed, paperwork I could use later if needed. My second stop was the law office of Patricia Henley, an attorney who specialized in elder law. I'd found her name in the phone book, and her receptionist had managed to squeeze me in for a late afternoon consultation. Patricia was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She listened without interruption as I explained my situation, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad.
Mrs. Brennan, she said when I finished, what you're describing sounds like a textbook case of financial exploitation planning. The fact that they're involving a medical professional to build a case for incompetency is particularly concerning. What can I do to protect myself? Several things. First, we need to document your current mental capacity thoroughly. I can arrange for you to be evaluated by an independent geriatric psychiatrist, someone who has no connection to your daughter-in-law's friend. Second, we should update your estate planning documents to reflect your current wishes and include specific language about your mental competency. She leaned forward, her expression grave. Most importantly, Mrs. Brennan, you need to understand that once someone initiates conservatorship proceedings, the process can be difficult to stop. The best defense is preparation. Over the next 2 hours, we drafted a comprehensive plan. Patricia would arrange for Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a respected geriatric psychiatrist, to conduct a thorough cognitive assessment. We would update my will, create a durable power of attorney with very specific limitations, and establish what Patricia called protective documentation that would make any future claims of incompetency much harder to prove. One more thing, Patricia said as we concluded our meeting. You should consider installing some form of surveillance in your home. If they're planning to manufacture evidence of declining mental function,
You'll want proof of what really happened. That evening, I stopped at an electronics store and purchased 2 small security cameras, the kind advertised for monitoring vacation homes. The young man behind the counter showed me how to set them up to record to a cloud storage service that only I could access. Back home, I installed one camera in the living room, hidden behind some books on my shelf, and another in the kitchen, tucked between the microwave and a decorative plant. Both had clear views of the common areas where most of our family interactions took place. Then I sat down at my computer and began documenting everything. Every suspicious conversation I'd overheard, every time they'd gone through my mail or asked probing questions about my finances. Every instance of them discussing my future like I wasn't part of the equation. I created a detailed timeline, including dates, times, and specific quotes where I could remember them. I scanned and saved copies of all my financial documents, medical records, and the new security protocols Janet had established at the bank. By midnight, I had assembled a comprehensive record of their scheme, complete with my own preemptive legal responses. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of control. Trevor and Amanda thought they were hunting a naive, vulnerable old woman. They had no idea they'd actually cornered a retired teacher who'd spent 4 decades staying ahead of people trying to outsmart her. They wanted to play games with my future? Fine. But they were about to learn that I'd been playing this game much longer than they had, and I played to win. The attack on my competency began exactly 1 week after I'd installed the security cameras. It started with something so small that most people would have dismissed it as coincidence, but I'd been expecting it. I came home from my dental appointment on Tuesday afternoon to find Amanda in the kitchen, holding my checkbook and wearing an expression of manufactured concern. "Diane, honey, I found this on the front porch. Did you maybe drop it when you left this morning?" I stared at her calmly. I'd left that checkbook in my bedroom dresser drawer, locked inside a small wooden box that also contained my passport and some cash. There was no possible way it could have ended up on the front porch, unless someone had taken it there. "How strange," I said, taking it from her hands. "Thank you for finding it." "You might want to be more careful," Amanda continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Identity theft is such a problem these days, especially for seniors. Maybe you should consider letting us help you keep track of important things like this." I smiled and nodded, playing the part of the grateful, slightly confused old woman she expected to see. But internally, I was cataloging every detail of her performance for the documentation I'd been keeping. 2 days later, Trevor discovered that I'd apparently left the stove burner on after making my morning coffee. He made a big show of turning it off and opening windows to air out what he claimed was a smell of gas. "Mom, this could have been really dangerous," he said, his voice heavy with concern that didn't reach his eyes. "You could have burned the house down or worse." The problem was, I don't drink coffee in the morning anymore. I switched to tea 6 months ago because caffeine was keeping me awake at night. I also haven't used the stove since Sunday, when I'd made soup for lunch. But Trevor didn't know that I'd started keeping a daily log of my activities, including timestamps for when I used appliances, made phone calls, or left the house. By Friday, their campaign had escalated to something that would have been genuinely concerning if it had actually happened. I returned from my weekly grocery shopping to find Amanda and Trevor waiting for me in the living room, both wearing expressions of deep worry. "Mom, we need to talk," Trevor said, gesturing for me to sit down. "Mrs. Patterson called while you were out." Mrs. Patterson was my elderly neighbor, a sweet woman who lived next door for 15 years. I immediately felt a spike of concern. "Is she all right?"
"She's fine," Amanda said quickly. "But she called because she was worried about you. She said you came over to her house this morning, very confused and agitated, asking about people who don't exist." I blinked at them. "What people?" "According to Mrs. Patterson, you were looking for someone named Robert, and you seemed to think he lived in her basement. You were quite insistent about it, and when she told you no one by that name lived there, you became upset and accused her of lying."
This was completely fabricated. I hadn't spoken to Mrs. Patterson in 3 days, and when I had, it was a brief conversation about her new rose bushes. I'd never mentioned anyone named Robert, and I certainly hadn't been in her house. That doesn't sound like something I would do, I said carefully. Trevor leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. Mom, I know it's scary to think about, but sometimes our minds play tricks on us as we get older. Mrs. Patterson was really concerned. She didn't want to upset you, but she felt like we should know. Amanda nodded sympathetically. It might be a good idea to schedule an appointment with Dr. Morrison, just to make sure everything's okay. There's no shame in getting a checkup. Dr. Morrison. Amanda's friend, who was apparently ready to diagnose me with cognitive decline based on manufactured incidents and secondhand reports. I think I'll call Mrs. Patterson myself, I said, just to apologize if I worried her. I saw Amanda and Trevor exchange a quick glance. The kind of look people share when their carefully laid plans hit an unexpected snag. Oh, I wouldn't do that, Amanda said quickly. She seemed pretty shaken up by the whole thing. Maybe give her some space for a few days. That evening, I did call Mrs. Patterson. She answered on the second ring, her voice as cheerful and clear as always. Diane, how lovely to hear from you, dear. How are those new vitamins working out for you? I'm doing well, Mrs. Patterson. I was just wondering, did you happen to call Trevor today about anything? There was a pause. Call Trevor? No, dear, I don't have his phone number. Why would I call him? Amanda mentioned that you'd called with some concerns about my behavior, something about me looking for someone named Robert. Mrs. Patterson's voice sharpened with indignation. I most certainly did not. Diane, what on earth is going on over there? You haven't been to my house since Tuesday, and we just talked about my roses. I'd never call someone to report concerns about you. You're one of the most sensible people I know. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a mixture of vindication and fury. They hadn't just lied about my behavior, they'd impersonated my neighbor to create evidence of mental instability. But their lies had given me something invaluable, proof of their deception that I could verify independently. The next morning, I drove to Dr. Morrison's office without an appointment. The receptionist tried to turn me away, but I insisted on speaking with the doctor, explaining that it was regarding some urgent concerns about my mental health. Dr. Morrison was a thin woman in her early 40s with blonde hair and a nervous energy that made her seem younger than she probably was. She agreed to see me for a few minutes, clearly expecting a confused elderly patient seeking reassurance. Mrs. Brennan, she said, settling into her chair with a patronizing smile, Amanda mentioned you might be experiencing some concerns about memory issues. How can I help you today? Actually, doctor, I'm here because I understand you've already formed some opinions about my mental state based on conversations with my daughter-in-law. I wanted to give you an opportunity to evaluate me directly before you provide any medical testimony about my competency. Her face faltered. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean by medical testimony. I mean the documentation you've been helping Amanda compile to support a conservatorship petition. The instances of confusion and poor judgment that you told her would be necessary to prove cognitive decline. Dr. Morrison's face went pale. Mrs. Brennan, I think there's been some misunderstanding. Doctor, I need you to understand something very clearly, I interrupted, my voice calm but steel hard. If you provide any medical opinions about my mental state based on secondhand reports from Amanda Walsh, I will file complaints with both the state medical board and the authorities for participating in elder abuse. If you've already documented anything about my supposed cognitive decline, I suggest you review those notes very carefully. I stood up, gathering my purse with deliberate calm. I've been evaluated by Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a geriatric psychiatrist with 30 years of experience who found me to be fully competent and mentally sharp. Her report is already filed with my attorney.
Any medical professional who contradicts that assessment based on fraudulent reports will find themselves in significant legal trouble. I stood up, gathering my purse with deliberate calm. I trust I've made myself clear. Have a wonderful day, doctor. That afternoon, I received a call from Patricia Henley, my attorney. Mrs. Brennan, I just got the most interesting phone call from a Dr. Morrison. She wanted to clarify that she has no intention of providing any medical testimony about your mental state, and she's never had any professional interactions with you that would form the basis for such a testimony. I smiled grimly. How considerate of her to clarify that.
Indeed. She also mentioned that if anyone has suggested otherwise, it was based on a misunderstanding of casual conversations that were taken out of context. Amanda and Trevor had just lost their medical witness, but I had a feeling they weren't done trying to build their case against me. I was right. The real escalation was still coming. Their final, desperate move came on a Sunday evening, exactly 3 weeks after Dr. Morrison had withdrawn her support for their scheme. I was in my bedroom, organizing some old photo albums, when I heard the front door slam shut with unusual force. "Mom!" Trevor's voice carried up the stairs, sharp with manufactured panic. "Mom, you need to come down here right now!" I found them both in the kitchen, Amanda clutching what appeared to be official-looking documents, while Trevor paced back and forth like a man on the edge of a breakdown. "Sit down, Mom," Amanda said, her voice trembling with either genuine emotion or an excellent performance. "We need to discuss something very serious." I remained standing, crossing my arms. "What's this about?" Trevor stopped pacing and turned to face me, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "Mom, we know about the gambling." I blinked at him. "The what?" Amanda spread the documents across my kitchen table with shaking hands. "We found these in your bedroom, hidden under your mattress. Betting slips, withdrawal receipts from the casino, records of online gambling accounts. Diane, you've lost over $40,000 in the past 6 months." I looked down at the papers she'd arranged so dramatically. They were indeed betting slips and casino receipts, professionally printed ones that looked remarkably authentic. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to create this evidence. "These aren't mine," I said calmly. "Mom, please don't lie to us anymore," Trevor pleaded, and for a moment I almost believed the anguish in his voice was real. "We're not angry, we're scared. Gambling addiction is a serious problem, especially for seniors. It's actually a symptom of early cognitive decline." Amanda nodded gravely. The isolation, the secrecy, the poor decision-making, it all fits the pattern. Dr. Morrison explained that elderly people sometimes develop compulsive behaviors when their judgment starts to deteriorate. Interesting that Dr. Morrison was back in the picture despite her previous retreat. Amanda continued, "We've already spoken with an intervention specialist. There's a residential treatment facility in Clearwater Springs that specializes in helping seniors with gambling addictions and related cognitive issues. They have a wonderful program." Clearwater Springs. I'd heard that name before in one of their whispered late-night conversations months ago. It wasn't a gambling treatment facility. It was a memory care unit. "The good news is that we can help you," Trevor said, pulling out another set of papers. "I've already consulted with a financial advisor about damage control. If we act quickly, we can prevent you from losing the house and your pension, but it requires immediate intervention." Amanda leaned forward, her eyes bright with false compassion. "Diane, honey, we need you to sign these papers today. It's a temporary financial guardianship that will protect your assets while you get the help you need." There it was. After months of manipulation, manufactured evidence, and elaborate schemes, they'd finally revealed their endgame. They wanted me to voluntarily sign away my financial independence based on gambling receipts they'd planted in my own bedroom. I looked at both of them,
my son, who I'd raised alone after his father's death, and his wife, who'd turned him into someone I barely recognized, and felt a cold clarity settle over me like winter air. Before I sign anything, I think we should call the police. The color drained from Trevor's face. Mom, that's not necessary. Oh, but it is. I walked to my purse and pulled out my phone. You see, there's been a burglary in my home. Someone broke into my bedroom and planted fraudulent gambling receipts to make it appear that I have a problem that would justify stripping me of my legal rights. Amanda stood up so quickly her chair toppled backward. Diane, you're being paranoid. Am I? I pressed a button on my phone, and suddenly their voices filled the kitchen. A recording from 3 weeks ago, captured by my hidden cameras. We can't wait much longer, Trevor. She's getting suspicious. If we don't push at all, we'll be stuck in this house forever. The key is documenting specific instances of confusion or poor judgment. We need examples. I watched their faces as their own voices played back their conspiracy in crystal clear digital audio. Amanda's manufactured concern evaporated, replaced with something cold and calculating. Trevor looked like he might be sick. I have hours of recordings, I continued conversationally. Your plans for conservatorship, your collaboration with Dr. Morrison, your discussion of memory care facilities, and your fake reports about Mrs. Patterson. All of it documented and safely stored in multiple locations. I pulled out a manila folder from the kitchen drawer and placed it on the table next to their forged gambling receipts. These are copies of real documents, restraining orders already filed with the county court, a civil fraud complaint prepared by my attorney, Patricia Henley, a detailed report from Dr. Elizabeth Chen confirming my complete mental competency, and a very interesting affidavit from Mrs. Patterson about how you impersonated her to create false reports about my behavior. Trevor's hands were shaking now. Mom, we can explain. You can explain to the police, I said, dialing 911. Hello, I need to report attempted elder fraud and financial exploitation at 47 Maple Street in Millbrook Heights.
Amanda made a sudden lunge for the phone, but I stepped back smoothly. The perpetrators are still in my home, and I have extensive evidence of their crimes. Mom, please, Trevor grabbed my arm. We're family. You can't do this to us. I looked into his eyes that used to light up when I read him bedtime stories, when I cheered at his baseball games, when I handed him his college diploma that I'd worked 3 jobs to pay for, and felt something break inside my chest that had been cracking for months. Family doesn't try to steal your life savings, I said quietly. Family doesn't fabricate evidence of mental illness. Family doesn't plan to warehouse you in a facility so they can sell your home and spend your pension. The police arrived 12 minutes later. Officer Maria Santos and her partner, Officer James Wright, listened patiently as I presented my evidence. The security camera footage, the audio recordings, the forged gambling receipts that Amanda had been foolish enough to leave fingerprints on, the documentation of their lies about Mrs. Patterson. Ma'am, Officer Santos said to Amanda as she placed handcuffs on her wrists, you have the right to remain silent. You're being charged with elder abuse, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation. Trevor wasn't handcuffed, but he was informed that he was also facing charges and would need to appear in court. As the officers led Amanda toward their patrol car, she turned back to me with eyes full of rage. You'll regret this, she snarled. You'll die alone in this house and no one will even know you're gone. I smiled at her. Not the warm smile I'd given her when she first moved into my home, but the cold, satisfied smile of a woman who just won a war she never wanted to fight. Better alone than with thieves, I replied. After they left, I sat in my kitchen with a fresh cup of tea, looking at the empty chairs where Trevor and Amanda had sat so many times, plotting my downfall over meals I'd cooked for them. The house felt different now, not empty, but clean, like a space that had been contaminated and finally disinfected. 3 months later, Trevor and Amanda both pled guilty to reduced charges and were sentenced to community service, restitution, and 5 years of probation. Trevor sent me a letter from his new apartment across town, apologizing and asking if we could somehow rebuild our relationship. I never replied. Some bridges once burned aren't worth rebuilding. Some people reveal who they truly are when they think no one is watching. And once you've seen that truth, you can't unsee it. I kept the house, kept my pension, and kept my independence. I also kept the security cameras, though now they just recorded the quiet comings and goings of a woman who'd learned that being alone isn't the same thing as being lonely. The silence in my home didn't ache anymore. It sang with the sound of freedom, hard-won and well-deserved. And every morning, I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, with my own money safely in accounts that only I could access, knowing that the only person making decisions about my future was me. It was exactly the way it should be.